I accompanied Felix through the most difficult 6 years. After achieving success and fame, he no longer had to pretend to be a loving husband with me. He went back to his first love, choosing our 6th anniversary to show her off. Their affair became the talk of the town, and I became the biggest joke in our city. But Felix casually joked with his friends. Now that things are going well, even if I go overboard, she won't leave me. He bet that I wouldn't give up on my current life. But he wasn't the only one with a first love. Later, when I was worn out in the arms of my first love, unable to even lift my fingers, Felix, like a madman, was determined to take me home at all costs. His first love elegantly knocked out one of his teeth, saying, "Since the first love is back, what business do you have here?" Chapter 1. I was 10 minutes late to Felix's celebration banquet. The door was slightly ajar, and it was noisy inside the private room. His brother's voice came through the door in a hushed tone. "Taking Diana back to the country, are you crazy? Are you still thinking about her?" I stood there with a cake, subconsciously halting my steps. Diana, rumored to be Felix's first love. It was said that Felix almost lost his life because of her back then. Through the crack in the door, I saw Felix tilting his head back to take a sip of alcohol. In a hoarse voice, he mockingly said, "I never forgot. Never forgot." Thinking carefully, I seemed to have been by Felix's side for a full 6 years. From his humble beginnings to now worth over 100 million. Everyone said Felix loved me to death. Felix also said that once everything improved, he would proudly marry me. But after achieving success and fame, Felix seemed too lazy to continue pretending. "How could you forget if you couldn't forget? Why did you break up back then?" I asked coldly. The room fell silent the moment I spoke. After 2 quiet seconds, many people came over to smooth things over. Christine, Felix had a couple of drinks and was just joking. His closest brother nudged him. "Explain quickly." Felix resumed his usual carefree demeanor, casually taking the cake from me, and said with a smile, "What a coincidence that you heard that." I remained silent, just watching him. They say Felix is a well-known socialite in the circle, able to maintain a relaxed attitude no matter the situation. So even though I heard those words with my own ears, Felix's expression remained unchanged. "Why did we break up?" Felix thought for a moment, then looked down at me and smiled. He reached up to adjust the end of my hair, finally giving up the act. The voice with a playful tone sounded in my ear. "Probably because I couldn't bear to let Diana suffer with me." Chapter 2. It was indeed tough accompanying Felix in his entrepreneurial journey. A white bun divided in 2 for sharing. Back then, Felix rested his chin on my shoulder, whispering in my ear that everything would be all right. As he wished, everything did gradually get better. Felix rose rapidly, becoming a hotshot in the industry. Everyone sought to please him. With all this, he no longer needed to maintain the gradually fading feelings between us. He could do whatever he wanted, including addressing his regrets from his youth. Felix's voice was not loud, yet everyone heard clearly. A moment of silence filled the room. Felix's gaze fell on me, as if graciously stating, "But don't worry, as long as you behave the position of a wife, I will always keep it for you." Felix's voice was not loud, yet everyone heard clearly. The whole room fell into a silent hush. Many people stealthily raised their heads to gauge my reaction. I didn't say a word. After taking back the cake from Felix, I turned and left the private room. Behind me, Felix let out a satisfied chuckle. Chapter 3. Felix kept his promise, and soon Diana was brought back to the country by him. When they broke up back then, things were not pleasant. Diana left the country in a fit of anger, and Felix made no effort to stop her. A rash action in their youth turned into a lasting regret. Felix was relieved to say that he now had the ability to make amends. The day Diana returned to the country was particularly lively. With red eyes, she stood in front of Felix, defiantly raising her head. "Didn't you say you never wanted to see me again?" People around them tried to ease the tension. That was obviously just a heated moment. Yes, remember the handmade gift you gave President Felix? He still keeps it in his cabinet. Who touches it, who gets scolded? Felix ruffled her hair, chuckled, and said. So, you don't want to see me either, huh? Forced by the situation, Diana hid in his embrace. What about Christine, do you love her? Felix leaned in to silence her lips, vaguely asking. What do you think? After a long time apart, Felix sent a bouquet of roses to Diana, shaking the entire city of R. The affair between the two of them became the talk of the town. I became the subject of gossip in the entire city of R. When Felix returned, there was a red mark on his neck. He glanced lightly at me. Still not asleep? I nodded. I couldn't reach you on the phone, so I was waiting for you. Did you try calling? Felix furrowed his brows, took out his phone and scrolled through it, finally finding my number in the blacklist. Diana had taken the liberty to block me. Felix's eyes softened. Her temper hasn't changed after all these years. His affectionate tone was like talking about a mischievous cat. I lowered my eyes. It had been a long time since I had seen Felix like this. In the past, when I made mistakes, Felix would shake his head helplessly and then clean up the mess with a smile. But 6 years was too long, enough to wear away a lot of passion. After moving my number out, he finally looked at me. What do you need from me? Our wedding anniversary is next week, I hope you won't be absent. Felix paused for 2 seconds, then reacted. Are you still doing these charity events? Yes, sponsoring children in the mountainous areas, it's something I've always wanted to do before meeting Felix. It's gradually making progress now, but not enough. The anniversary banquet itself isn't important, what's crucial is the charity sponsorship project organized through this event. The resources I can gather on my own are limited, so Felix must not be absent. That's also the reason I've tolerated Felix until now. I want to use his influence to spread this ongoing activity to more people. All right, Felix nodded, took something out of the cabinet, and said. I probably won't be home during this time, you can come to the office if you need me. I nodded, okay. As I was leaving, Felix suddenly turned back, his gaze falling on my face, and he asked probingly. Christine, don't you care at all? Care about what? Care about his entanglement with Diana? Or care about how much he still loves me now? I looked at him curiously. If I cared, would you change? Felix smiled slowly, he stared at me and softly uttered 2 words. No chance. Chapter 4. Felix was convinced that I couldn't bear to leave the gradually improving life, couldn't bear to lose the identity of his wife, and couldn't bear to leave him. As I became the subject of gossip in our city, some friends asked Felix this question. When you promised to marry Christine, are you not afraid that she might be stubborn and never turn back? Felix sat on the couch, laughing casually. He said, now that things have turned for the better, no matter how much I overdo it, she won't be able to leave. He was particularly convinced that I wouldn't leave. I don't know how he comforted Diana, and I don't want to care. Now, only the current donation project makes me extremely nervous. Approaching the rainy season, there are too many accidents that can happen in the mountainous areas, not just now, but also in the future, there will be no shortage of places needing funds. The publicity is not enough, it needs to be known by more people. But the more I care about something, the less I get. Diana just doesn't want to let me have my way. So, she acted spoiled and stubborn, insisting on holding the banquet on the same day as my and Felix's anniversary. I went to Felix's company. I don't usually come to his company, but as soon as I entered, I noticed many people were secretly sizing me up. Rumors were circulating in the company that Felix's first love had returned, and I was soon to be abandoned. In the company, I also saw Diana. Now, she had become Felix's personal secretary. It seemed like she knew why I had come to the company, deliberately mentioning it in front of Felix, not giving up until he agreed. Leaning against the table, Felix glanced at me. There couldn't be any accidents at this event. Now, I didn't care about Felix's thoughts, but I still needed him. I walked over, looked up at him, softened my tone. You know, this is very important to me. Doesn't that matter to me? Diana raised her voice, turned to Felix. Felix, I've said that I can only accept that there's only me by your side. I'll give you time to deal with Christine's matters. But this time's banquet, I consulted a master, it's auspicious. It has to be on that day. Diana minded my presence, so she always had to do things opposite to me. Her attitude was particularly resolute, and Felix sighed softly. The ringing of the phone broke the deadlock. I picked up the phone, there was still something to deal with in the mountainous area. Before leaving, I turned and looked deeply into his eyes. Felix. Don't make me truly hate you. Chapter 5. Felix finally agreed to come. I breathed a sigh of relief. On the day of the banquet, I invited many media reporters. After the scene was set up, everything was ready. I kept looking towards the door, but I never saw the person I was waiting for. The people who came to the banquet were all here out of respect for Felix. With no sign of him, whispers began to spread through the crowd. It's getting late, is President Felix going to stand us up? I heard that woman is President Felix's first love. What can Christine do to compete with her? The crowd started to get restless. To maintain the situation, I stepped forward and said, President Felix is delayed due to some matters, please wait a moment. Before I could finish speaking, my phone suddenly vibrated. Not just me, many people at the scene received a message. Today, Felix hosted a banquet for Diana. This news broke out at this moment. Suddenly, many eyes turned towards me, as if watching a clown. My heart gradually sank. Taking a deep breath, I reluctantly opened my phone. I received a video from Felix. In the video, Felix was personally arranging the banquet for Diana. His profile was focused and serious. It was obvious that Diana had sent the video from his phone. Meanwhile, in the hall, many reporters were waiting for the banquet to begin. As the news of Felix not showing up spread, many people found excuses to leave and went over to Diana. Sorry, Christine, something came up at the company suddenly, I have to leave. I suddenly have something to attend to. With Felix absent, the meaning of this banquet was lost. I stood in place, watching the gradually emptying venue, feeling a chilling emptiness in my heart. Even my fingertips began to numb. Felix had lied to me. From the beginning. He never intended to come. Chapter 6. In the end, less than 1/5 of the people remained at the banquet. A few of Felix's friends stayed behind, and since I had a decent relationship with them, they stepped in and persuaded a group of people to stay. I lowered my eyes, took a few deep breaths, and composed myself. Without Felix, I decided to stick to the main theme. Even if only one person remained, I couldn't give up hope. Leveraging the media coverage, I promoted this charity event. It wasn't until it ended that I received a call from Felix. I answered without saying anything. It seemed like he was nearing the end of his side of the call, and since he didn't hear my voice, Felix chuckled. Why so silent? Are you mad at me for today's event? I lowered my eyes, trying to discern the meaning behind his words. He knew how important this dinner was to me, yet he casually stood me up without a hint of remorse in his tone. That's just how it is. In Felix's eyes, I probably would never be able to bear leaving. Just like he said, it didn't matter how far he went. Even if he played me along with Diana, it wouldn't matter. He was convinced I couldn't leave him. As night fell, I stared at the empty banquet venue after it ended and suddenly let out a relieved laugh. This time, there was absolutely no reason left to stay by his side. On the phone, Felix's voice continued, light and airy, as if coaxing a pet by his side. I know this event was very important to you, I'll make it up to you, okay? Aren't you doing this charity for the mountain region? I'll make it up to you next week. Felix. I raised my head and suddenly interrupted him. After a moment of silence, I calmly said, let's break up. Chapter 7. There was a strange silence from Felix's end. Without waiting for him to speak, I hung up first. When I looked up, I noticed the surroundings had also quieted down, and Felix's friends were looking over. They had helped a lot today, and I sincerely thanked them. Their faces changed drastically. Christine. You're not joking, are you? You really want to break up with Felix? I simply nodded. Felix is just that persistent from the beginning. Endure this, Christine. Don't act impulsively for now. One by one, their expressions were complex. I knew what they meant. After all the hardships they endured with him, they were also unwilling to see me being taken advantage of. I tilted my head to look at them. If I were really after wealth and status, I wouldn't have agreed to be with him when everything was crystal clear back then. After saying this, they suddenly fell silent. I returned home, packed my belongings. My phone kept vibrating, Felix's calls coming in continuously, so I decided to block him. Early the next morning, I left the city for the mountain region. The situation in the mountain region was a bit worse than I had imagined. Heavy rain had made the already difficult mountain roads even muddier. Even the rundown school was in danger of collapsing. The old village chief hadn't slept all night, fatigue evident in his eyes as he continuously smoked his pipe, gazing at the muddy village. Most of the labor force had gone out for work, leaving only the elderly and children behind. When he saw me, he hurried over, wiping his hands on his clothes before extending them. Christine. Take a look at this. I stared at the mud, determined. Leave it to me. When I returned to City R, I realized that news of my breakup with Felix had already caused quite a stir. Many media outlets tried to get some information from Felix. Felix casually smiled at the camera, his words laced with a hint of sarcasm. Breakup? Will she really do it? Someone keenly caught onto the key information. So, are you saying that all the recent breakup rumors are false, that Christine can't leave you, is that right? Felix remained silent, chuckling. The day I couldn't leave Felix was instantly trending. But these things didn't matter to me. After the heavy rain in the mountain region, the roads became even muddier, and road repairs were a top priority. Taking advantage of the momentum, I organized a completely transparent donation drive. With the experience from the previous event, this time, although there were some hiccups, it was considered a successful event. However, it was apparent that a large portion of the attendees were there solely because of me and Felix. They kept steering the conversation towards Felix and me. Christine, I heard you mentioned a breakup, is that true? If it is, why is CEO Felix so sure you won't leave? Are you really just putting on a show, or is this a strategy? Can you answer that? I smiled at them. I organized this event in the hope of truly helping those in need, doing what I can within my means. Perhaps we can set aside certain unrelated issues for now and focus more on the current situation in the mountain region? No matter how they asked, I never took the bait. Unable to get any information, their interest waned. However, the next moment, a sudden burst of exclamations erupted from the crowd. Many people looked up towards the entrance. The crowd gathered at the door, and a person walked in with a smile on their face. My eyes widened, and as I looked up, I met the gaze of the newcomer. As expected, Felix had arrived at this moment. Chapter 8. This was the first time I had encountered Felix after the breakup. Felix's appearance immediately stirred up gossip among many, getting them excited. Many eyes were on us, creating a scene full of gossip. I looked at him expressionlessly. I don't recall inviting Felix. Of course, if you're here to donate, then I welcome you wholeheartedly. Felix raised an eyebrow slightly. He walked towards me, smiling gently. Haven't had enough of quarreling with me yet. His words were ambiguous, deliberately blurring the lines of our relationship in front of everyone. As he wished, as soon as the words fell, someone couldn't help but speak up. CEO Felix, have you and Christine not broken up? Break up? Felix smiled, his gaze lightly sweeping over me, and he confidently stated. She won't leave me. In between the lines, I couldn't leave him. In an instant, the gazes of the people on site all carried a mocking tone that seemed appropriate. At the same time, on the live broadcast online, the barrage comments were flooding in. The breakup rumors from the past period were probably just a stunt. Christine has waited for so long, how could she bear to leave? And the breakup became widely known? Playing hard to get, huh? Why do people always think so poorly of women? Disappointment accumulates, and she will definitely leave. Just watch, she wouldn't leave me even if I ate shit standing on my head. Felix's smile deepened, apparently very satisfied with this outcome. When I proposed a breakup, it made him particularly uncomfortable. Deliberately choosing this occasion to ask was to show everyone that no matter how much I made a scene, I couldn't bear to truly leave him. He had the ring ready and, under everyone's gaze, he slipped it onto my middle finger. His fingers gently brushed my face, and he said with pleasure, "Once you've had enough of causing trouble, come back obediently." I lowered my eyes, staring at this ring. It seemed that Felix didn't take my breakup words from last time seriously at all. Many of the live cameras turned towards us. This kind of high-profile gossip at a luxury event could become tomorrow's hot topic. Felix, as always, gazed at me with a confident smile. For him, coming here was already giving me an out. How could I refuse? I looked up at him. "Felix, are you so sure that I can't bear to leave you?" "Yes," Felix smiled gently, lowering his voice curiously. "After the bitter comes the sweet, can you really go back to the way things were before?" "If you didn't hear me that day, I don't mind saying it again here," I warned. Before I could finish speaking, Felix suddenly grabbed my wrist. His smile faded slightly, his words carrying a warning. "Think carefully before you speak." I slowly pried his fingers off my hand. Right in front of him, I took off the ring, raised my hand, and threw it away. The ring rolled a couple of times and stopped at his feet. I stared at him, saying each word deliberately. I said, "We're breaking up." "Felix. Do you hear me now?" With a voice neither loud nor soft, as soon as the words fell, everyone's expressions changed, and the atmosphere froze on sight. Felix stared at the ring at his feet, his face darkening. He laughed, his whole demeanor becoming frightening. "What do you mean? Have you thought it through?" Felix tightened his grip on my hand. "Do you really want to break up with me?" Chapter 9. Felix was accustomed to disguises and hadn't lost his composure in public for a long time. But at this moment, he struggled to control himself. This state lasted for a few seconds as he closed his eyes and suppressed his emotions. When he opened his eyes again, he regained some composure and softly said, "Christine, if you pick up the ring now, I can forgive your impulsiveness." I walked over, staring at him. I stepped on the ring under my foot. "Felix," I said firmly, "we are really over." Many people looked at Felix, unable to maintain his composure, his face contorted in anger. He tried to salvage some dignity, laughing at me. "You brought this upon yourself. Christine, I'll be waiting. Waiting for you to come crawling back, begging me." Chapter 10. I told Felix. That day will never come. That night, Felix left without looking back. I paid no attention, finished up here, and then went to the mountain area with supplies. The old village chief led the way, walking ahead with a slight hunch, repeatedly expressing his gratitude. Perhaps news had spread in advance, as every household was waiting at their doors, ready to greet us without the need for knocking. Children continued to join us, following behind and helping out. With the funds raised, road construction was not delayed for a day, and the school needed to be renovated again. This would take some time, so I stayed briefly in the mountain area. After the previous incident, the mountain area gained some exposure, and I heard that teachers would soon come here for volunteer teaching. The children surrounded me, clearly in good spirits, sneakily stuffing wildflowers into my hands while I wasn't paying attention. I waved the flowers at them, saying, "Thank you." The girls ran away shyly, while the bold boys loudly said there were many more flowers over there, all for me to pick. I nodded in agreement. The cool night breeze was refreshing and comfortable as I looked up quietly. Following Felix for these years, there had been too many twists and turns in our circle, always on edge. Now, I felt completely relaxed. After the breakup, many friends asked me if I regretted it. I said, there's nothing to regret. Felix is indeed capable, but I never intended to rely on anyone to live. Over the years, I've helped Felix in his business endeavors. I hold a portion of shares in his company, so even after the breakup, I still receive a substantial dividend each year, enough to support me in my charity work. Chapter 11. During this time, Felix never contacted me again. Instead, our breakup became a topic of discussion for many people. Some even bet on how long I could hold out before going back to him. Felix, the one involved, personally set the terms. He cut off all my funds, betting it wouldn't be more than 3 months before I came back. His brother told me these things, but I remained calm inside. Is that so? Well, he might be disappointed then. I have my own job, enough to support myself. There was a brief pause on the other end, then a tentative question. Christine. You really don't plan on going back? Why should I go back? After saying this, there was a bland warning voice on the other end of the phone. Christine, there is a limit to how much you can be stubborn. A voice I was particularly familiar with. I didn't expect Felix to be there. Upon hearing his voice, I simply hung up the phone. It was said that day, Felix was laughing when suddenly he kicked over the table. The room fell silent, no one dared to speak. With a stern face, Felix said, "Call her back." One of his brothers sighed and advised him. I think this time, she is determined to end it. Before he could finish his sentence, Felix grabbed him by the collar. Watch your words. His tone was firm. She won't leave me. Chapter 12. Felix counted the days waiting for me to return. He kept calling from different numbers, but didn't say a word. But when I make up my mind, there's no turning back. Felix can wait if he wants. During this time, I got to know the children in the mountain area well. They were afraid I would be bored, so after school, they always ran over to play with me, telling me funny stories to make me laugh. As I descended the mountain, the sky was getting slightly dark. A little girl ran towards me as usual, full of excitement. She told me that many people had come to the mountain today. There were teachers, kind-hearted people bringing supplies, and even a handsome brother. Is that so? I shook the wildflowers in my hand, squinting at the sunset. It's quite lively, isn't it? The handsome brother said he came here to find the girl he likes, his first love. Sister, what is first love? Do you have one too? I paused for a second, subconsciously a face appeared in my mind, although we had been separated for a long time, that face was still clear. I nodded. Yes, he was a very proud person. Wow, then sister must really, really like him. I patted her head, not saying anything. The next moment, I was suddenly poked on the arm by a little boy. He leaned over and whispered. Sister, look at that person in front, he's been sneakily watching you. He brought a lot of things today, he's the kind-hearted person the old village chief mentioned, sending supplies. I followed his gaze and saw, in the twilight sunset, Felix took off his usual suit jacket, stood still, quietly staring at me. Chapter 13. I furrowed my brows, turned to walk away. Felix strode over to block me, frowned. It's been a month, still haven't had enough. I was genuinely curious. How did you figure out I was causing trouble? Felix chuckled, looked over the mountain area, then at me. As long as you come back and admit defeat to me, I can help you with whatever you want to do. Still with that condescending tone. I shook my head. Not a chance. Felix's face darkened. He looked up at the evening sky, said softly. I told you the position of a wife is reserved for you, you can be rebellious, but know when to stop. What benefit is there for you in being stubborn? I smiled. Not a damn thing. Christine. Felix was annoyed, but my mood was much more joyful. He turned to me, suddenly recalling the conversation I had with the children earlier. Proud person, first love, mentioning him seems to make you happy. I hummed a song without speaking, but Felix was particularly persistent on this issue. How come I didn't know you had an unforgettable first love too? I chuckled. Is that so strange? Felix, you're not the only one with a first love. Even if I think about my first love, so what? Felix looked at me, then laughed. So, you're still angry at Diana, saying these angry words. My head started to ache. No matter what I said. Felix always thought I was angry and broke up because I loved him too much. But in reality, I had long lost feelings for him. I lost my patience and decided to summon the group of children to interrupt the conversation. Before leaving, Felix looked at me with full confidence. I'll give you time to think, Christine, don't really provoke me. Chapter 14. I was speechless and started to doubt life, not knowing how I had been able to deal with this kind of person for so many years. Not long after, the children around suddenly became excited. Handsome brother is here. Handsome brother is here. Curiosity piqued, I looked up, only to unexpectedly meet a pair of familiar eyes. In that moment of eye contact, he raised his eyebrows slightly, forming an intriguing arc. I froze in place. It felt like my scalp was exploding. I hadn't expected that the handsome brother they mentioned would be Stanley. Chapter 15. After a few years. I never thought I would meet Stanley here. After a while, I found my voice. What a coincidence. Not really. Stanley stared at me, smiling faintly. I knew you would come. The kids dispersed tactfully. In the silent night, only Stanley and I were left. After a long separation, there were no tears of joy, no overwhelming emotions. Stanley looked at the direction Felix left. After breaking up with me, it seems like you haven't been doing well either. Felix, that dog-like person, went back after rekindling his first love. You can tolerate this? Christine, see things clearly after a few days. Stanley's tongue remained sharp after all these years. I couldn't take it anymore. Enough with the hurtful words, can't you? Stanley fell silent. This relationship was indeed not glorious, I didn't want to discuss it. As I turned to leave, he suddenly pulled me into his arms. My wrist was tightly held, and as I looked up, an unexpected kiss landed on my lips. There was warmth on the edge of my lips, a light touch. Instinctively, I struggled, but Stanley tightened his grip on my wrist. He teased with a bite, his fingertips entwined in my hair, gradually deepening the kiss. It wasn't gentle. It felt like all the emotions of these years of separation were merging in this moment. Breaths intertwined, heartbeats amplified infinitely in the night. I stiffened, listening to his voice murmuring in my ear. Is it true? What? Stanley lowered his gaze to me, his voice slightly hoarse. What you just said about missing me. Is it true? Since you miss me, why didn't you look for me? My brain buzzed. He had indeed heard everything that Felix and I had just talked about. Chapter 16. I had forgotten the reasons for our breakup back then. There was no grand event, Stanley was inherently extremely proud. He never bowed his head, and I never turned back. Approaching graduation, we parted ways like most couples. It was unlike him to be so straightforward as he was now. A searing pain on my lips, I remained silent. Stanley patiently stared at me, as if waiting for an answer. Is it important if it's true? It's important. Stanley's eyes held no hint of humor. Very important. If you still miss me, my path to reconciliation would be much smoother. Chapter 17. I fled. I ran away. Stanley's gaze was too serious, my mind blank, unable to withstand such a look. Yet the next day, he appeared as if nothing had happened. Whatever I did, he would rush to help before me. This continued for a few days, and the kids couldn't help but gossip. Big brother, do you like the pretty lady? Stanley didn't hide it. Yes, she's single, I'm single, and I'm pursuing her again. Said so openly, even I was shocked. I hurried over to cover his mouth. Can you stop talking nonsense in front of the children? Stanley innocently looked at me. But they all say we're a good match. I turned around to see a row of little heads behind a rock discussing. So his first love is the pretty lady. I told you so, the handsome brother must like the pretty lady.
Yeah.
My grandma said it's called being a perfect match. How do these kids know so much? Chapter 18. During this time, Stanley always followed me, helping with everything I did. There was a surreal feeling that we had never actually broken up. Stanley and I had originally met during mountain activities. With similar aspirations, we were both deeply interested in each other. Stanley never hid his feelings. During our university days, everyone knew about his girlfriend, Christine. So when we broke up, many friends sighed and felt sorry. Stanley was highly regarded in this mountain area, praised by women and children alike. He arrived here before me and had already done a lot before I came. The kids remained silent on the surface but secretly cheered Stanley on. Handsome brother, I believe in you. Stanley raised an eyebrow. Christine, what about you? What? Do you believe in me? After so many years of breaking up, why do you suddenly want to get back together? If I told you that I've been thinking of you for many years, would you believe me? I chuckled. Were you just waiting for me to break up? Stanley smiled and softly said. I swallowed and couldn't laugh. Chapter 19. The most frequent question Stanley asked me during this time was whether I would consider him. He even brought up Diana. If Felix can find his first love, why can't you? I'm willing to be your tool for revenge, even if I'm just a tool, I'm willing. Both are first loves, why is there such a big difference? In this world, others can be repatriated, but I can't even consider certain people. The kids around us were all won over by him, gathering around and repeating in my ear. Consider it, sister, consider it. I was speechless. But I had to admit. Stanley's presence did indeed improve my mood. Feeling the wind on my face, I realized I didn't resist him. Just as Stanley said, since we were both single, everything was fine as long as we followed our hearts. Chapter 20. I never turned back. Felix said he wanted to give Diana a proper status. People waiting for the outcome instantly became excited, saying I had gone too far this time and completely annoyed Felix. When Felix called and I wasn't there, Stanley happened to pick up. In a low voice, Felix said, Christine, I'll give you one last chance to surrender. If you don't come back within 3 days, I'll. Before he could finish, Stanley suddenly laughed. Oh, good news, support, the trash has finally piled up together. No need for 3 days, please lock it up immediately. After saying that, he hung up decisively. I turned back in confusion from picking wildflowers. Who called? Stanley came over to help me pick flowers, not looking up as he said. A harassing call. Oh. When I lowered my head again, Stanley suddenly grabbed my wrist. He had woven a ring out of a leaf and placed it on my finger. I suddenly realized that he had been sitting on the rock just now, busy weaving this thing. I teased casually. What, are you going to confess? That's not very sincere. As soon as I finished speaking, Stanley took out an exquisite box from somewhere. Opening the box, an exceptionally beautiful diamond ring lay quietly inside. I was stunned. Watching Stanley drop the grass ring he made and carefully put the ring on my middle finger. The fingers that Stanley had just touched gradually grew numb, and my heart skipped a few beats. When did you prepare this? The ring size was just right, tailor-made. Stanley smiled. If you're going to pursue, you can't do it without some sincerity. Chapter 21. The calmness of many years was suddenly shattered. The heart was beating strongly in the chest. Beat by beat. I tightened my fingers, turned my head away. I don't seem to have anything worth you liking for so long. Stanley raised his eyes and stared at the mountains. I discovered this place a bit earlier than you, but you acted faster than me. Before you came, every time it rained here, the dirt road turned muddy, going to school was always a problem. Now the road is fixed, the school is going to be renovated, because of your efforts, more people are paying attention to this place. You've helped more than just those people. Over the years, I have been following all the charity work you've done, big and small. You've never changed in this regard. Christine, you're the only one who doesn't realize how great you are. Sunset in the west. The evening breeze brushed over our faces. Stanley's gaze looking over was gentle and affectionate. I impulsively grabbed his collar and kissed him on the lips. Stanley suddenly froze. Before I could say anything, a roar erupted from nearby. What are you two doing? I flinched, turned my head, and saw Felix rushing towards us in a cloud of dust. Chapter 22. Felix's appearance was too sudden. I was completely unprepared. He fixed his eyes on Stanley and me, suppressing the emotions surging up, and asked me. Christine, who is this person? What are you doing? 2 eggs under the eyebrows, only know how to blink, not see. What are you doing, can't you see? Stanley's face remained calm, looking as if his good deed had been interrupted. Whenever he wasn't in a good mood, he tended to be particularly sharp-tongued. Felix's face turned pale with anger. Who are you, and who gave you the right to get close to her? Stanley chuckled. Right in front of him, he lightly wrapped his finger around my waist. Then he bowed his head. Under Felix's gaze, he leaned down and kissed me. A brief taste. After infuriating Felix, he poked my waist again and whispered. How about you, what's my status? I snapped out of it, took a deep breath. Perhaps the atmosphere was just right. I held Stanley's hand, looked up at Felix. Let me introduce you. My boyfriend. Chapter 23. Felix's face darkened instantly. He raised his hand to pull me away from Stanley, but I quickly stepped back, avoiding his touch. What do you mean? Felix probably never expected that I wouldn't turn back. A qualified ex should act like they're dead, understand? Ex? Felix chuckled with frustration, his gaze scanning over Stanley. Did you break up with me because of him? Or is it because of Diana's situation that you deliberately found someone to put on a show with? Felix's voice chilled. I've told you before, there should be limits to playing around, Christine, you've really crossed the line this time. Playing around? I was puzzled. Where do you see me playing around? I've told you before that it's over between us, and you never believed me, did you? Furthermore, I paused, sweeping my gaze over the anger on his face. What makes you think I have to be with only you? As I spoke, the smile on Felix's face gradually faded. His gaze probed my face, trying to find even a hint of joking. But unfortunately, there was none. However, self-deception was Felix's specialty. He furrowed his brow and asked me. How far do you plan to take this? Are you angry that I gave Diana a title? As long as you come back with me now, I can take back those words. The position of my wife will always be yours. I held Stanley's hand, passed by him expressionless. Don't even think about taking me back right now, go get a brain CT scan at the hospital first. You're probably seriously ill. After coming down from the mountain, Stanley stared at the hand that was being held and asked me if the earlier actions were deliberate theatrics in front of Felix. I shook my head. You should know that I never joke about other people's feelings. Under Stanley's gaze, I looked up at him and whispered softly. Let's start over, Stanley. Chapter 24. With the mountain incident settled, upon returning, many people were waiting to see me make a fool of myself. Felix still believed that I was acting. He waited for me to come back begging for reconciliation, sent me a message saying that as long as I agreed to come to tonight's banquet, he would immediately get back together with me. That night, many friends were present. As I walked through the door, there were murmurs in the room. She really came. President Felix was right, she really can't bear to leave. A smile gradually appeared on Felix's face, he looked up at me. Christine, I knew you would. Before he could finish his sentence, Felix suddenly froze. He stared at the man behind me, the rest of his words stuck in his mouth. The whole room suddenly fell silent. I held Stanley's hand and walked up to Felix. Felix stared at the couple ring on our hands, his expression turning increasingly ugly. I cut to the chase. The reason I'm here today is to tell you for the last time. We've broken up, I wasn't acting, and I never thought about turning back. From the moment I said those words, I meant them sincerely. Whether you believe it or not is your business, I don't want to get involved. I have a new life, please don't disturb me anymore. Originally, I didn't plan to come, but Stanley insisted I make this trip, taking him along. Felix remained silent. His gaze fell on the ring, silent for a moment, he looked up at me, voice soft. Christine, what is this? This ring, Felix had also prepared it today. It was said that he was genuinely hoping to reconcile with me, as he never thought I would leave. Stanley considerately raised his arm, seemingly wanting him to look closely. Take it off. Felix ordered, his eyes fixed on me, suppressing his anger. You can only wear the one I gave you. Muttering to Stanley. He's crazy, let's go. Take it off, don't make me say it a third time. As I turned to leave, Felix suddenly stood up, grabbing my wrist. That night, the usually proud Felix turned red in front of everyone. But he still stubbornly smirked. You expect me to believe you're not acting? How could you suddenly fall in love with someone else? Do you really think I'm that stupid to believe such a lame excuse? He gritted his teeth, each word pronounced with intensity. No matter what you say, Christine, I never allowed you to leave. I was about to speak up when Stanley rolled up his sleeves and suddenly grabbed Felix's collar, landing a punch. Felix staggered back a few steps, his anger rising. The scene instantly turned chaotic. When I came to my senses, Felix was already sitting on the ground. Burning with anger, lips tinted crimson, Felix sat there. Stanley stood in place. He lowered his head, looking at the disheveled Felix with a cold gaze, his tone tinged with mockery. Take a good look. First love is back, what business do you have here? The words first love slammed into Felix, leaving him stunned. He stood frozen for a few seconds, then looked up, his gaze gradually falling on Stanley. First love? So, the words you said about missing your first love back then, weren't a joke? Felix stared at me in disbelief, his voice hoarse. You got back together? Chapter 25. Felix ended up in the hospital. Half beaten, half enraged. I suspected Stanley insisted I attend this banquet just to have a legitimate reason to punch him. After that night, news about us spread. When I wasn't paying attention, Stanley directly posted a photo of us together on my Weibo account. By the time I noticed, the comment section had already exploded. What's going on? Wasn't she intentionally acting with Felix? Did she really come? No. Huh. Why the surprise? Our Christine is beautiful and kind, she's helped so many people, it's even made the news. Not just anyone is worthy of her. I told you earlier, Christine really wanted to break up. When will our buddy who ate dirt upside down last time announce his broadcast? Glancing at the man on the couch who was peeling oranges for me, I asked. What's happening? Stanley handed over the peeled orange innocently, shrugging. A mature man should learn to give himself some dignity. I chuckled. Later, someone dug up the fact that Stanley and I had been together since university. His confession back then caused quite a stir in the entire school, with many classmates even coming forward with old sugar-coated stories. Some people asked, since we were so loving back then, why did we suddenly break up? Stanley took it upon himself to answer directly. In the dead of night, he replied with over 1,000 words, saying that we were young and naive at the time, missing out on many things because of our immature thoughts. Some others tried to sow discord, asking if he truly didn't mind my past with Felix. Stanley said, regarding this question, he had thought about it many times, and the only thought he had was regret. If he hadn't let go back then, I wouldn't have met Felix, nor had the chance to be hurt. Life doesn't have many 6 years, being sincerely let down, victims should not be blamed or discussed, they did nothing wrong, and have the freedom and right to pursue happiness again. Whenever Felix treated her well, I never had the chance to appear before her. Christine has always been kind, being able to reconcile with her is always a goal I aspire to. Later, someone discovered that every mountain area I had visited, Stanley had gone to alone afterward. Reading through these posts, my nose tingled, a sadness I had never experienced before enveloped me. I never imagined that someone like me would be liked so passionately for so many years. Stanley ran his fingers through my hair, chuckling comfortingly. "Don't cry." Before he could finish his sentence, I threw myself at him and kissed him. Stanley froze, then after a moment of shock, he lowered his eyes and chuckled, wrapping his arm around my waist. In the quiet night, the atmosphere was just right. His fingers intertwined in my hair, exerting pressure as if trying to embed me in his arms. Clothes fell to the floor. Skin against the cool tabletop, I shivered, pushing him away. To the bed. The rest of the words were blocked by our lips. I closed my eyes, feeling his fingers roaming on every nerve. The night sea surged and roared. Just like the emotions Stanley had hidden for years. Wave after wave crashed, leaving no room for breath. Lost in emotions, I was completely led by the rhythm, indulging in it, suppressing my breath on the lips. Stanley leaned in close, whispering harshly in my ear. "I want to hear." As the words fell, Stanley applied a bit of force. I gasped, blushing, burying my face in the bedsheets, feeling like Stanley was utterly wicked. Chapter 26. At that time, Felix promised to give Diana the status of a legitimate girlfriend. Diana joyfully spread the news everywhere, but Felix backed out. He told Diana he changed his mind. Even if he once liked Diana, that was in the past. Time had passed, perhaps there were regrets, but upon obtaining it, he realized it wasn't the same feeling as before. He said the person he wanted to marry was not her. Simply put, it was despicable. Diana smashed everything in Felix's living room, her eyes red, asking, "Who is she, Christine?" Then, what was I during this time? Felix didn't answer. Quietly watching her smash everything, he took out a card. "You agreed back then, all for this, right?" Diana's face stiffened. After crying and causing a scene for a while, she eventually picked up the card and left. When I heard about this incident, I suddenly remembered what Felix had said to me at the beginning. Perhaps it's because I couldn't bear to let Diana suffer with me. I suddenly found it very ironic. Selfish people often tend to justify themselves. The one they love the most from start to finish is always themselves. Chapter 27. Later, Stanley proposed to me. The ceremony was particularly sensational. Flowers filled the city, fireworks lit up the sky. That day, I received countless blessings from people. Due to my actions over the years, unexpectedly, I gained a large number of fans. The messages in my inbox were too many to read through. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had never imagined that so many people would like me. At an auction, Felix bid a high price for a limited edition necklace. It was something I had longed for in the past. He handed me the necklace, but I found it dirty and didn't reach out to take it. Felix's hand hung in the air. He looked at me, his eyes filled with loneliness. After a while, he forced a smile and said, "If it weren't for Diana back then, would you still choose to leave?" I didn't bother answering these meaningless questions. As I turned to leave, I heard Felix speak behind me. His voice was choked up. "Christine. Have you really thought it through? Don't you want me anymore?" I sneered inwardly. Selfish people are good at acting. You can pretend to be sentimental with me, but don't fool yourself. Later on, Felix went mad a few times, obsessively wanting to take me back home. Of course, that was impossible. He grabbed Stanley's sleeve and ended up losing a tooth. Chapter 28. As my wedding with Stanley approached, I encountered Felix again. He asked me, "Is there no chance for us to meet again in the future?" I looked at him quietly, without saying a word. Stanley came over, holding my hand, and responded to him. He looked at Felix, a smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Where did you hear that?" "Of course, there will be a chance to meet. On our wedding day, remember to come. I'll seat you at the same table as the dog." Chapter 29. Later, when we got married, Felix couldn't make it either. I heard he fell down the stairs and broke his leg. Actually, both legs. When this news reached Stanley's ears, he didn't stop smirking all day. He pretended to be concerned when he saw me. Really, I even had a seat arranged for the dog. I burst out laughing, tiptoed to his lips, and kissed him softly. It's his bad luck. Stanley returned the kiss, his fingers sliding up gradually from my waist. Anticipating his intentions, I firmly held his restless fingers. "I'm really tired today." "It's not a problem." Stanley held my wrist, kissing me while muttering, "Let me take care of you." "Are you daring to be so disrespectful?" Well, Stanley's kisses descended from below. "Punish me then. Punish me to love you forever."